going to get started. You are at Accessibility is a Moving Target, and I want to thank DrupalCon for inviting me the second year to talk about accessibility and inclusion, because I think it's a real a wonderful topic. I am presenting today from Ohlone Lands outside of the San Francisco Bay Area in Hollister, California. My name is Amy June Heinlein. I use she and her. I am the open source community ambassador and QA engineer over at Canopy Studios. I also am a co-organizer for accessibility talks along with Carrie, who is in the audience. That's ALLYTALKS, where we talk about all things accessibility. I'm a core mentor for Drupal contributions, so come to contributions all afternoons at DrupalCon. There'll be plenty of help if you haven't contributed before. There'll be mentors, all skill levels, all roles are invited to participate. And I'm a member of the Community Working Group Community Health team. Like I said, I work with Canopy. We are hiring. So if you're interested in working with some really wonderful people, Canopy designs, builds, and support websites for clients that want to make a positive impact. Today, we only have 30 minutes, so it's some of it's going to be kind of quick. But I'm going to talk about what is accessibility. I'm going to go over some of the terms and definitions, and I'm going to give them I want to give them because it would be a disservice for beginners not to at least introduce some of these terms, but I'm not going to go into them in depth because more of the presentation later is what we're here for. And then I'm going to talk about a life cycle of a website, designing for accessibility, accessible content, and then some free tools that we can use to help audit and assess our content for accessibility. So I have this slide in a lot of my presentations, but what does it mean to embrace accessibility? It really means understanding what it is. And today the context is I'm going to talk about producing rich content that can be accessible not only across websites, but also around digital assets. And why do we design for accessibility? Well, it's the law, but we also want to really think about having that wider base of consumers that are able to access our content. According to the Center for Disease Control, nearly 1/4 of Americans live with a disability. That's 1 in 4, or roughly 63 million people. And remember, as we get older, we become more disabled with time. You know, our eyesight deteriorates, our hearing can go down, but there's also situational disabilities like your mouse running out of batteries or using a smartphone or tablet in the bright sun. Your house could be overrun by noisy children who are home because of the shelter in place, and you can't find your headphones, you know, and you really need those closed captions. And of course, there's those unseen disabilities as well. You know, not every disability can be seen. There's fatigue, dizziness, mental health disorders, cognitive dysfunctions, brain injuries. You know, we have to think of, you know, beyond the hearing and vision impairments. And accessibility means for everyone. You know, it means that everyone can readily access whatever it is you're offering. You know, in our real life, it's, you know, ADA, you know, making sure that we have accessible venues, but it also means your written content as well. I have to move the transcripts because they are flickering and they're very distracting. So just give me a second, okay? And we have to remember, most importantly, that inclusion and accessibility aren't about giving special privileges to people. It's about making sure that those barriers are removed in the first place. I found this great quote by Kate, and I don't know if her name is Bornstein or Bornstein, but she's so colorful. You know, she's got this tie-dye jacket and these really great nails, and what a bright smile. And she says, let's stop tolerating or accepting difference as it were so much better for not being different in the first place. Instead, let's celebrate difference, because in this world, it takes a lot of guts to be different. And I really like this because we really want to celebrate our uniqueness. So terms and definitions, I'm just going to breeze through these since I'm sure a lot of folks already know them, but like I said, it would be a disservice not to remind folks. So there's a lot of letters and a lot of numbers out there. There's the ADA, which is the American with Disabilities Act. It prohibits discrimination and guarantees that people who live with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else to participate in everyday life in America. Section 508 requires federal agencies. It's a procurement law. So it really established the idea that federal agencies need to maintain and use information and communication that's accessible to people who live with disabilities. And this is regardless or not of whether they work for the federal government. Bill C-81 is the Accessible Canada Act. This bill aims to benefit all Canadians, especially those who live with disability, by creating a barrier-free Canada. And then the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. It's an international community that really develops the guidelines and ensures the quality and growth of the web. So Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG or WCAG, WCAG, its goal is to provide a shared source of guidelines for web content and accessibility. It's intended for web content developers, web authoring tool developers, web accessibility evaluation tool developers, and really anyone who needs that standard for web accessibility. And I just want to mention this, that accessibility, user experience, and inclusion are very different things. They complement each other, but they're very different. So we have WCAG 2.0. It's a collection of 40 guidelines that improve usability based on different abilities. And you may have heard of this. It's called POUR, which is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivability means that the user can identify content in the elements in the interface by means of the senses. Operable means that the user can successfully use controls like buttons, navigation, and other necessary interactive elements. The U is for understandable, being able to comprehend the content and learn and remember how to use the interface. And then robust. We should be able to choose the technology in which we want to interact with the web, and our digital assets, including, online documents, PDF, multimedia, not only websites. And, to break down POUR a little bit more, what makes content accessible? It's those 4 broad parameters. Make it easy to see so you accommodate visual needs. You want to make sure it's easy to interact with, accommodating people's motor needs. Some people are unable to operate a mouse. Therefore, multimedia content should be delivered in players or in a medium where they can be operated with the keyboard alone, for example. And that controls are properly labeled so that they're announced, if people are using screen readers, or they can be operated effectively by, let's say, speech input devices. Auditory needs, you want to make it easy to hear, so you accommodate auditory needs. Some people are just unable to hear audio. And there's audio all over the place, there's recorded lectures and podcasts, and they should really be accompanied with transcripts and video, and videos should be provided with closed captioning as well. And then the last one is make it easy to understand. So you accommodate folks' cognitive needs. We want to make the experience as equivalent as possible across all the websites and digital assets, regardless of things you can't control, like browsers and operating systems. So digging a little bit deeper into WCAG, WCAG 2.1, this had everything that WCAG 2.0 had to offer, plus 17 new items. A couple of them I have up on the screen are considerations for line height, orientation, color contrast of non-text. And then WCAG is broken down even further into 3 levels, the A, the AA, and the AAA. Each increasing A indicates an additional set of criteria to follow. So level A is really about minimal compliance. If your website doesn't meet this level, then it means that it's really difficult for people with disabilities to use your site. Double A is sort of this acceptable criteria, acceptable compliance. It means that your website is usable and understandable for a lot of people. And then the triple A, this is your optimal compliance, which means that your website is accessible to the maximum number of users with or without disabilities. So this AAA really indicates the highest level of usability. And the more you get into accessibility, the more you realize that accessibility and usability really do come hand in hand. When we talk about 508 compliance, we're usually talking about the AA compliant level. So, you know, the name of my talk is, you know, accessibility is a moving target, and I want to talk about what's sort of on the horizon next. So along with 2.0 and 2.1, there's 2.2, which was a working draft in August of 2020. And it was initiated with the goal to continue the work of 2.1. It really wants to improve accessibility guidance for three major groups: users with cognitive or learning disabilities, users with low vision, and users with disabilities on mobile devices. So it has everything that 2.1 had to offer, plus 9 items. And I'm not going to go into the individual guidelines because I really want to stress that no matter what guidelines are coming, it's our responsibility as web designers and coders and developers and content authors and editors to know what's coming next. Or anyone who cares about digital accessibility. It's important to keep track and know about them. And even though these criteria are only in draft, they're important enough for someone to list them. So even if some of the draft doesn't come to fruition, it was important enough for someone to put into a draft. So kind of moving past that, the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group recommends that most of us and all of our sites should adopt 2.2 as our new conformance target, even if it isn't formalized yet, because it provides accessibility and usability, and it really sort of moves forward for those forward policy changes. Okay, so there's 3.0 now too. This specification is a rather new model and a new set of guidelines to make our web content applications accessible and support a wider set of needs. You know, it provides new guidelines for approaches to testing and allows frequent maintenance of guidelines and related content to keep up with technology as it changes. And what 2.2 and 3.0 do is it kind of changes things up a bit about the way we think about the guidelines, you know, taking into account more disabilities, thinking more about cognitive disabilities moving forward. And that's something that wasn't really considered too much before. We want to be able to apply more technologies than just the web, and these guidelines are opening up that space as well for things like virtual reality, augmented reality, and voice assistant, things like that. And then we want to consider all the technologies that people use, including web authoring tools, browsers, and media players. It really expands the scope of current guidelines. It really comes down to that accessibility is not static. It's dynamic and it's never really done. It's always changing, and we need good sources of information in our tool belts. This can be attending conferences, online meetups, subscribing to newsletters, you know, really doing your research and finding the information sources that are the most credible sources of information and sort of adding them to your daily or weekly reading list. I put 2 up here from the W3C because they are sort of the first source of information. Usually they have a blog and they have a Twitter feed. But whatever method of content delivery you prefer, they'll have resources for accessibility. You just need to curate them and be dedicated to seeking out the information. So user agents. This is assistive technology, or AT. It's any device or software or equipment that helps people work around challenges they have in learning and communicating and functioning on the web. So that's assistive technology. Screen readers, they're used to listen to the content of a web page. They really convert speech to text, or text to speech, sorry. And we should keep in mind screen readers can be used along with visuals on the web page for folks who live with cognitive challenges as well. They're not just for people with low or no vision. Alternative input devices, this is basically an alternative to the typical mouse and keyboard interaction for users with physical or cognitive impairments. They can include head pointers, motion tracking or eye tracking, large print and tactile keyboards, single switch entry devices, speech input software. The picture up here is a refreshable braille display. Screen magnification software. I don't know if it's just me, but it seems like websites are getting smaller and smaller, and the fonts are getting smaller and smaller as well. And I'm always having to hit the command +++ a few times. And screen magnification is true to its name. It's used to enlarge the screen content, so it's easier for us to read, especially if we live with partial sight impairment. It's used for people with partial sight impairment to enlarge the content, but also screen magnifiers have text-to-speech functionality as well sometimes. So I'm just going to kind of breeze through some assistive technology that folks might not be accustomed to. I'm a nurse by trade. I'm a hospice nurse and work with quadriplegics, and so I have firsthand knowledge. So sometimes it's easy for me to forget that some people aren't familiar with devices that some people use to access digital or to access websites. So eye tracking, this is sometimes called eye gaze. It's a system that monitors eye movement, and it helps control the mouse pointer and detects blinking to initiate my mouse clicks. There are accelerators. This software helps reduce the effort needed to type or click. Keyboard customization, this includes mapping of keys. It can be assigning shortcut keys to functions, setting filters, adding sticky keys to support single hand typing. Pop-up and animation blockers, these are web browser plugins or other software that stop that automated pop-up window or redirection. And some of them can provide options to stop, pause, and hide animations as well. Refreshable braille display, that's that picture we saw in the previous slide. It's a mechanical terminal that displays a line of braille. And the characters, the dots raise up dynamically. It raises and lowers the dots. And reading assistance, this is software that changes the presentation of the content and provides other functionality to make it more readable. And these can include things like customizing your font size, scanning the text for complex words, and maybe linking to glossaries and tooltips. They can hide less relevant parts of the content, like sidebars or heading areas that can be distracting. And sometimes some of these reading assistants will read the content out loud and highlight the text as it's being read as well. And then the last one I'm going to talk about are page maps, which is really, it displays a small image of the entire web page with and it indicates and highlights what part of the web page is currently being viewed. User agents. We're going to roll the dice with some of these user agents that I just talked about. There are so many different combinations of browsers and devices and ways to access information. When it comes down to testing, you really need to be creative and empathetic about what challenges people might have and what software they're using. Blindfold yourself, hide your mouse, turn your contrast really low. So I'm going to give one example because we're short on time. So just one example. Okay, I'm on the Caltrain because I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's in the winter. I'm traveling to San Jose to maybe meet meet up in San Francisco for the San Francisco Drupal users group. So I'm on my cell phone. I need websites to be responsive and not limit my screen orientation to, to landscape or portrait. I need there to only be one scroll bar because I can't navigate side to side and vertically at the same time. The train is packed, it's standing room only. I want to watch my favorite movie, but cannot reach my headphones because they're in my backpack and someone's behind me. So I want to utilize closed captioning so I can understand what's going on in this Doctor Who flick. But remember, it's winter and it's probably raining and I had too much coffee and I'm a bit shaky and I've dropped my phone. So my screen is cracked. That touch target needs to be large enough for me to activate without the crack getting in the way. All different types of things. On a desktop, I might have the CSS and the images disabled and I'm navigating, the site by keyboard only. I want to be sure I don't miss out on any important visuals that are important to context and content. Again, just a roll of the dice. So life cycle of a website. I want to pause and talk about how all of our communities need to stand up against racism. Racism, like the Asian American Pacific Islander group, have really, violence towards these groups have really raised during the pandemic. So I invite folks to check out this hashtag on Twitter or go to the website up here and find out more information about how you can help. And that's Stop AAPI Hate, or the website is stopaapihate.org. What's the typical life cycle of a website? We draw up our wireframes and we do research while getting our stakeholder input. Then the research gets passed to the user experience and design team. Then the developers get involved in the QA process, or the QA person may add placeholder content because it's hard to test your site with and how your site functions if there's nothing in there. Then there's stakeholder handoff. The site has sort of popped out on the other side, leaving the content creators and the editors to finish off the site before launch. So this is sort of that linear, life cycle of the website. With that, I want to talk about our roles and responsibilities, because all of those tasks that are listed in that life cycle have people assigned roles. They perform tasks. There's designers, there's front-end developers, back-end developers, our QA people, our product owners, our editors, along with so many others. We need to make sure that we're giving all of our roles accessibility responsibilities. That means having cross-functional teams. I attended a session a few weeks ago at AxeCon with Glenda Sims from DeQ, and she said that when they're testing their websites, she said that 2/3 of the issues that DeQ finds on their websites could have been resolved at the design phase. Well, that was one of the first phases, right? So it went through all of those other phases, before it got caught. If the accessibility discussion starts with the wireframes and the developers and the designers can weigh in at the same time, there's not that much to fix before stakeholder handoff or at time of launch. We really need to think about empowering our designers and the people who do research to imagine accessibility in mind, from the start. Fixing an issue in production is so much more complicated than in the design phase. And then we also have to think about our editors and content creators. We need to empower them and set them up for success. We train our designers, we train our coders, and it really comes down to training everyone on your team, including those content folks. They are in the website way longer than us after handoff. They are in there day to day after the developers and coders are done with the website. So we really need to make sure that everyone is involved in the accessibility process. Now, I want to reimagine the life cycle of the build, where you start with the wireframes and that sort of thing, in that linear form. And let's inject testing at the wireframe and research level. Test our designs as they go from sketch to user experience, for usability. Test and audit the development phase while placeholder content is added. And then when we test for accessibility at all of the different phases of development, or better yet, we bake the accessibility into our websites from the beginning, it really alleviates some of those headaches later on. Let's reimagine again the life cycle once more and take it from linear to circular. This process is a form of continuous website improvement. We need to remember that accessibility is never done. We want to make sure that we strategize and develop in a style that allows flexible changes as the guidelines evolve. I'm going to say that again. We want to develop in a style that allows flexible changes as guidelines evolve, because we know that the guidelines change over time. We want to make sure that our solutions have impact. We want to create and implement best practices and do it iteratively. Have retrospectives with the team. Make sure that our solutions have impact. That's a really important part. We want to learn as we iterate. We want to understand what works through the cycle and what doesn't. That's where those retrospectives really come into play. Do you have accessibility reviews and audits? It's just like going uphill in a 36 horsepower Volkswagen Bug, like let's say a 1957 Bug. It's really hard, but once you get the momentum and it keeps you going, so that learning and iterating, that continuous website improvement, it can really be a challenge at first, but once you get the wheel spinning, you can gain that traction and momentum. So designing for accessibility. Design and content creation can be similar, but they happen at way different times of the website's life. Design is usually before launch. Content can happen at all phases. So I just want to go over a few design aspects. We'll concentrate on content next. And I am almost out of time, so I'm just going to kind of breeze through these. We want to make sure that we use visual and semantic space. Space is an important visual tool that helps us identify groups of related content. We want to make sure we provide enough space between lines of text. Make sure you use clean typography. Avoid all caps. Readability is greatly reduced when all caps, because the words have a uniform rectangular shape and people can no longer identify words by shape. Don't underline text. Reserve this for links. Use left aligned text. A consistent margin helps readability. Don't use two spaces after a period, and support text resizing, because we want to make sure our content responds to enlarged text. And I'm going to go a little bit into accessible content. Your code's accessible, but what happens over time when content is added, especially when you have complicated WYSIWYGs where people are able to inject all different kinds of things. Know your audience. This is pretty important. Fit your language to your audience and content. Stick to predetermined reading levels. Put your information in logical order with the most important details first. Provide alt text. The purpose is to describe images for those who are unable to see them. This is not only for screen readers, but for me living rurally, I might have images turned off in my browser and I really need that alt text to know what's going on. Familiar language, really make sure you use words and combination of words that people understand. Avoid jargon and buzzwords. It's unlikely to be clear. Often these words are really general. Be consistent with the words you use. If you refer to a person once, refer to them as the same thing throughout the page. Be careful using symbols and rare characters like ampersands or percents, because some folks might not be familiar with them. Be especially careful when using acronyms and abbreviations or numerals. Make sure you provide a key or a legend for them, the first time you use it and it's introduced. And remember, you want to make sure when you use familiar language, it's easily searchable and will often gain you a better SEO ranking. The words you use in your copy should reflect the words that people use when they enter into search engines. Plain language, you know, language that's difficult to read and understand is a barrier for people who may have cognitive disabilities, low reading literacy, or people who the topic is unfamiliar to them. So make sure that you write in a way that people can understand. This benefits people who use English as a second language as well. Sentence length and paragraph in general, keep words, sentences, and paragraphs short. This makes it easier to read and easier to parse information. And I have a list of testing tools. I don't need to go into them because we are at time, but these are some free tools that I want to share. You know, screen readers, you know, these are for blind and visually impaired folks. There's the Wave extension tool that has one-click functionality. The Axe is a browser extension available in the inspector window. Excuse me. Lighthouse is also in the inspector window. It's an open source automated tool for improving the quality of web pages, not only accessibility, but SEO as well. Keyboard, this is super important. All functionality must be usable with the keyboard. People should be able to move between links, forms, buttons, and any other interactive element with just keystrokes alone. Websites should not require a mouse. For example, you have a pop-up calendar. People should be able to enter the date in there. WebAIM Color Contrast is a free website that helps you determine the accuracy and clarity of the text and the contrast of visual elements. Site Improve Accessibility Checker, there's two of them. This one I like a lot because it's a browser-based extension. It tells you what's wrong, but it also tells you potential warnings that you should manually check for too. And the accessibility project checklist is really is based on the web content accessibility guidelines, you know, because remember that's that shared content for the shared guidelines for everybody. Zoom plus 200%, make sure that your text is adjustable and can still be clearly read when people enlarge it. An important characteristic of an accessible page is that it's free of syntax problems. So please do some CSS and HTML validation. The readability tool by WebFX takes text on your web page and gives it a score for the most used readability indicators. It's nice if you have your target audiences. And then I have a link to the tools, and like I said, I talk a lot, so I knew there wouldn't be time for Q&A. So for folks who have some questions, you can find me at the Pantheon booth in the Expo Hall at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And thank you. It's always nice to see people, even though I just see your names like go through the chat. And I will easy out of the box initiative meeting right now. That's what that alarm is. Sorry about that. But I'll parse through the chat and do some questions, and you can reach out to me across social media. It's at Volkswagen Chick, or there's a QR code right here on the screen. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much.